The Backsliders Blues. Her fatal beauty had become his trap. From the roof overlooking his neighbor's gap, the wife of the Hittite, an officer faithful and brave, who did not know he would soon be in the grave. For the king thought he had royal impunity. To take Bathsheba for himself, he had immunity from being put to death like the common man. So full of flattery, luxury, and power, it began with unholy desires to his carnal nature. David, who had the people's respect and honor, soon fell victim to the sin of the flesh. An entanglement he went all the way, nonetheless. The heaven-appointed leader, God's law to uphold, a sinister deception and murder soon to unfold. The adulterer was by law guilty of death. To hide the guilt of dishonor, he went deeper yet, into a plot to send Uriah in the front lines of the fight, so that he would be killed, for David had the right to assign men wherever he wished them at will. Bathsheba to be a widow, then his wife. That's until the word got out that the king was suspected to have murdered Uriah. He had gone undetected, but only for a while, as he thought he covered his sin. Even Joab, his accomplice, neither could win the battle for their souls, for the devil took over. Joab's allegiance to the king killed the soldier. Bathsheba too was just as guilty as the king's new wife. They hoped to enjoy the reward of an undisturbed life. It then became necessary for God to step in. He did not leave David in ruin and sin. David's sin did bring disgrace to his name. No longer the respected king, he had lost his fame. Nathan the prophet had a message of reproof, to point out the sin that started on the roof. He told of two men, one rich and one poor. The rich had many flocks and herds and lots more. The poor man had but one little lamb to keep. He tended to, nourished it, his one precious sheep. It ate and drank from his master's own cup. It sat in his bosom like a daughter he brought up. The rich man soon had a traveler as a guest. He sought to prepare some food and a place to rest. But instead of taking and cooking of the many sheep he had, he killed the one little lamb of this poor lad. In anger, the king declared, "That man should die. He should restore the lamb fourfold," was his cry. "You are the man," Nathan stood in the royal wing. "You shunned the commandments of God to do evil, O king. You have killed the Hittite with the sword and taken his wife. This was an evil, my lord. So what you did secretly, God will fix it in the open." He lost his wives to the neighbors, his child to put in a coffin. With bitter tears and fasting, he pleaded for its life. Night after night, with grief interceding, perhaps with his wife. This innocent child was now suffering for his wrong. Thus David had to write this sorrowful song, asking for God his transgressions to blot, to wash him and cleanse his sin spot, to purge him with hyssop, that he may be clean, whiter than snow, his sin no longer to be seen. A clean heart and a right spirit within, David pleaded with God to take away his sin. He wanted to restore the divine fellowship with God, so he would return to obeying God's holy word. This backslider had lost the joy of salvation. What a dramatic witness to the entire nation of a God most merciful, gracious, and just, who can save the sinner whose life has gone bust. The history of David does not give approval to sin. Walking with God and following his counseling is the only way to restore the sinner back to grace. How David will one day see the Lord's face. A man after God's own heart, after repenting and turning from his wicked ways, no reversing. He was broken in spirit. He lived to testify in the book of Psalms about God's loving reply. Here we learn how the way of transgression is tough. David's fall would serve as warning enough for those who think all is well, that they are secure, but the devil is waiting to get his foot in the door. Our strength and safety, in God alone we trust, not self or others. We too can fall prey to lust and other evils that are part of the devil's snare. If we stay close to Jesus, he will draw near. David's sacred solemn psalm is to be sung, a song about sin, repentance, and pardon from wrong. Hope of salvation, God's offer of mercy to all. so that others could learn from King David's fall.